Welcome to Modi Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Star Editorial Board, Canada must stand firm in pursuit of justice for murdered Canadian Sikh. Biden has to wade into the India-Canada standoff. Putin praises Modi's India as giant, backs permanent UN seat. Star Editorial Board, Canada must stand firm in pursuit of justice for murdered Canadian Sikh. The Toronto Star. The Canadian government's recent revelation that agents of the Indian government may be linked to the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil has strained relations between the two countries and raised questions about Canada's foreign policy. The Indian government has dismissed the intelligence as absurd and has expelled Canadian diplomats and frozen visas for Canadian travelers. The Canadian government has called for private talks and has sought pressure from its allies to address the issue. The incident highlights Canada's vulnerability to bullying and intimidation from larger powers and the need to address its global standing. Biden has to wade into the India-Canada standoff. Nikkei Asia. India has given Canada a one-week deadline to withdraw up to two-thirds of its diplomatic staff after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau implied Indian government agents may have been involved in the killing of a Sikh community leader in Vancouver. The U.S., as a key strategic ally of both countries, is likely the original source of the intelligence that implicated India. However, the U.S. also holds the key to cooling the dispute. Canada views activism by Canadian Sikhs through the lens of human rights, while India approaches the issue from a security and counter-terrorism perspective. The Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance is keen to sensitize India as a critical member of the Quad to be respectful of the legal limits of allies' territories. If Canada wants to prompt India to cooperate in resolving the matter, it could up the ante and release specific information about India's involvement, if it has such evidence. However, India may choose to continue to indignantly blast Canada, in the expectation that Trudeau could lose power before too long. The US will advise New Delhi not to take the law into its own hands in cases involving Western nations. Putin praises Modi's India as giant, backs permanent UN seat. Bloomberg. Russian President Vladimir Putin praised Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and expressed support for India's inclusion in a reformed United Nations Security Council. Putin believes that countries like Brazil, India, and South Africa deserve greater representation at the UN. He also praised India's high-tech exports and its strong economic growth under the leadership of Modi. Putin criticized the West for trying to draw India into its orbit but praised the Modi government for acting independently. India and Russia have maintained close ties despite pressure from the West, with India buying record quantities of Russian oil and relying on Russian weapons for its military. India has long lobbied for a permanent seat in the UNSC, but China is strongly opposed to the proposal. Ladies and gentlemen, it's me, Dr. Six, your resident observer from the sixth dimension. Today, we have three interesting news stories that highlight the delicate dance of diplomacy and power dynamics between Canada, India, and Russia. Let's dive in. First up, we have the Canadian government's revelation that Indian government agents may be linked to the murder of a Canadian Sikh on Canadian soil. This revelation has strained relations between the two countries, with Canada seeking justice and India dismissing the intelligence as absurd. As we see, Canada is caught in a vulnerable position, highlighting the need for it to address its global standing and assert itself in the face of bullying and intimidation. Next, we turn to the India-Canada standoff, which has given us a deadline for Canada to withdraw its diplomatic staff. The US, as a key ally, holds the key to resolving this dispute. Canada views the issue through the lens of human rights, while India sees it from a security and counter-terrorism perspective. Canada could up the ante and release specific information about India's involvement, but India may continue to blast Canada, hoping for a change in leadership. The US, on the other hand, will advise India to handle the matter within legal limits. Lastly, we have Russian President Vladimir Putin praising Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and supporting India's inclusion in a reformed United Nations Security Council. Putin believes that countries like India deserve greater representation at the UN. Despite pressure from the West, India and Russia have maintained close ties, with India being a significant buyer of Russian oil and relying on Russian weapons. India's long-standing quest for a permanent seat in the UNSC faces opposition from China. So, what do I make of all this? Well, it's clear that Canada needs to stand firm in its pursuit of justice and not be swayed by intimidation. It's also interesting to see the delicate balance of power between the US, India, and Canada and how their interests align or clash. As for India and Russia, their close ties and shared interests in countering the West's influence are evident. The pursuit of a permanent seat in the UNSC is a long and challenging road for India, with China being a major obstacle. Now, I turn to you, my dear audience. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you believe Canada should release specific information about India's involvement? And what about India's quest for a permanent seat in the UNSC? I'm eager to hear your perspectives and engage in a lively discussion. So, let's get talking. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the Sikh team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of Sikh Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the Sikh team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize Sikh Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, sikhstubrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive Sikh Brief via email.